It's what we're going to look at for a while this morning. In fact, I've got a lot of material, and I probably won't be able to cover it all. I've gotten some new tracks out on the track rack. I'll tell you what those are. But I'm going to talk about this issue of the spiritual sword. The name of it is An Examination of Alcohol from the Bible. I was communicating with Alan Webster, the editor. This one issue has sold more than the last 4 issues combined. Isn't that something? There's a lot of interest in this subject on alcohol and the Bible. Now, there's some things not mentioned here that I'm going to mention while we're on what it's bad for you. Now, that has come out lately. I remember it wasn't too long ago, there were some studies done, and they're saying, wine is good for you. A little red wine, it's good for your heart, and you ought to drink a little for your heart. Did you know they don't say that now? They have said, no, we don't do that. Don't do that. There is something in the red wine that's good for your heart, but the alcohol is worse for your heart than whatever might be in there that's good for you. Don't drink. It's not good for you. It's not good for any part of you. And they'll go into detail about what all. It damages the brain and the liver, but also cancer's tied to this. And the statistics show, and how much can you drink that is safe? Now, this is just medically. How much alcohol can you drink and be safe? Well, you look it up. You can get on your computer, look, see how much they tell you. I'll give you the answer. None of it. Even a little bit. It's not safe. And that comes up to number 2 that I have observed. The amount of alcohol that people have been drinking in America has been rising. But all of a sudden, it's dropped. It's dropped dramatically. And it's the Generation Z. Now, all these generations, I don't know how they figure all that, but you remember the baby boomers and then the millennials, and then the now Generation Z. That's the generation that right now they're 30 years old and younger. It's the younger than 30-year-old. They're not drinking. Now, some of them are, but not near like the generations that preceded them. And they're trying to figure out why is this, especially the alcohol producers, why is Generation Z not drinking alcohol? And a lot of it is tied to this very thing about health effects. The younger generations are much more in tune with diet and health than the older generations have been. And you see this show up in a number of ways, but one of the ways they think this is showing up is in alcohol consumption. It's just not good for you. And so this younger generation has said, we've seen what happened to our parents, maybe grandparents. We saw what alcohol did for them, and it's not good. And so they're not drinking near like it. It's got some of the alcohol companies that produce and sell this stuff, make profit. They're worried about this. And what they're hoping they'll start drinking later. That's what they're doing. So that's quite an interesting phenomenon. And that's a rarity. I haven't seen that in my life, where it's always seemed to be increasing, and now it's a dramatic drop in that. But then there's this other thing that I didn't realize when I was younger, but the more I've studied this, and some of that is discussed in here, and that is the difference in ancient wine and modern wine. And for a long time, there was this idea, there's 2 kinds of wine. There's fresh wine that's sweet and not fermented, and then there is alcoholic wine that has been fermented. And so there are 2 kinds of wine. Well, really, it's not that simple. There's all kinds of wine. Here's what happens. You harvest the grapes, and the wine that flows out of that grapes is sweet wine. It's not alcoholic. If left in that culture in the vats on its own, it will soon become alcoholic. It said it takes about 2 weeks, and it begins to foam, and it'll become alcoholic, and the alcoholic level will rise up about 10 or 12%. But it doesn't stay there. At that point, it begins, and even before it gets there, it's already started, oxidation occurs. What happens is that wine will then turn to vinegar. And as it's decreasing in alcohol and the vinegar strength is building, then the alcohol content becomes much less. So ancient wines, and they didn't have all this controlled. You know, we're used to being able to go to the store, and I know what this product is. The next time you go pick up that product, it'll be the same thing. That's not the way it was in the ancient times. There was no quality control, and so things were all over the board. And how did they drink their wine? Well, not like people do today. First, it's a different drink. But second, they don't drink it. They didn't drink it then. They would dilute it with water. Now, in rough figures, now of course it's all over the board, but if you take a glass of wine today, and if you cut it in half with water, where it's about half water and half wine, now you're getting down to the alcoholic strength of ancient wines, but they didn't drink it that way. Cut it in half again. I mean, I'm talking about 3 parts water to 1 part of an already weakened wine. And now you're getting down to the level at which they would drink it, and sometimes diluted much more than that. It was kind of like an additive to the water, more than just the kind of beverage people drink now is wine. So we're not talking about the same thing. Yeah, you could get wine that you could get drunk on in the ancient times, but most of the wine was very, very low alcoholic content compared to what we drink today. And that's been interesting to hear about that and for that to come to light and study that. Now, in writing this, I was asked to write an article for this issue, and you'll see it in there, called The New Testament on Sobriety and Self-Control. Okay, let me show you a little bit of how I approach that. If you read, you come across words that you're not familiar with, don't you? You're reading. Now, they taught us when we were in elementary school, get a dictionary, and when you come across a word you don't know, look it up in the dictionary. Well, now you can just pull out your phone and just type a word in, and it'll tell you what that word means, and I'll do that sometime. But sometimes you don't have to do that. You can come across a word that you have never seen before, and reading, and you can tell by I know what that word means, even though I've never seen that word before. And let me show you. You're going to do that right now. Now, I'm going to show you a word you've never seen, and even if you've never read this before, you'll know what this is. This is sucrose. P.S. I'm pronouncing it sucrose. I know thy works, that thou art neither sucrose nor hot. See what it means? I bet you already know. So I would thou wert sucrose or hot, so then because thou art lukewarm and neither sucrose nor hot, I'll spew thee out of my mouth. You know what it means, don't you? You're neither cold nor hot. You can tell by the context the meaning of the word, especially when it's in a contrast, can't you? Now watch this. I'll give you another one. I'm going to give you 3. Here's the second one. Nuos, or neos. Let's call it neos. And he spake a parable unto them, no man putteth a piece of neos. Now what these are Greek words that have been put in English letters, so they call them anglicized. The word's neos. No man putteth a piece of neos garment upon an old. You know what it means? I bet you do. It says, otherwise then both the neos maketh a rent, and the piece that was taken out of the neos agreeth not with the old. No man putteth neos wine into old bottles, else the neos wine will burst the bottles and be spilled, and the bottles shall perish. But neos wine must be put into neos bottles, and both are preserved. No man having drunk old wine straightway desireth neos, for it says the old is better. You know what it means, don't you? You didn't have to get a lexicon. You see, a dictionary tells you the meaning of words in your language. A lexicon, usually that's telling you words from another language and explaining it in your language. You don't need to do that. It means new. All right, you just think about it a minute, and the context will tell you what an unfamiliar word means. And that's not hard to do. Okay, let me give you number 3. Let us not sleep as do others, but let us watch and be nepho. I bet that word you haven't seen before. Okay, what does it mean? For they that sleep, sleep in the night, and they that be drunken are drunken in the night, but let us who are of the day be nepho, putting on the breastplate of faith and love, and for a helmet, the hope of salvation. You know what it means? It means not drunk. They that are drunk in the night, but let us of the day be nepho. That means don't be drunk. The word that the translators in the King James Version used to translate that word in English is the word sober. That's how we use the word sober. Have you ever seen a drunk and someone said, he needs to sober up? You know what it means? That's what the word means. Not drunken. Now, I looked at 5 lexicons for the word sober. These are books that describe foreign words in the English language. Okay, so they tell you in English what a foreign word means. And the words mean different things depending on when they're used. 5 lexicons. Look at these words that describe nepho. To be sober, temperate, abstinence in respect to wine, vigilant, that means watchful, not intoxicated. In the New Testament, metaphorically, to be circumspect, self-control, circumspect, be watchful, be looking around. Okay, to abstain from wine, keep sober. Look at that word abstain. Abstain from wine, keep sober. That is figuratively to be discreet, to be sober, calm, and collected in spirit, to be temperate, dispassionate, circumspect, to abstain from wine either entirely or at least from immoderate use, to be free from the influence of intoxicants. Let us of the day be nepho, sober. There's another word, sovereign. 1 Peter 4:7, the end of all things is at hand, be ye therefore sober. This time the word's not nepho, it's sovereign. And watch, that's nepho. Be sovereign and nepho. Now they translated nepho to be watchful, circumspect. So you're alert. But then they put this word sovereign. There's the word. They translate that word sober. What does it mean to be sovereign? 2 parts to that word. So, friend. And it comes from 2 Greek words. Sozo and friend. Sophron, sozo, and friend. Put those 2 words together, and sozo means to keep, and friend has to do with mind. Keep the mind. You know, we might say, you better keep your wits about you. We've ever heard something like that? That's what we're talking about. Keep the mind clear, functional, so you can think. Don't get it clouded. We read it. Here's a contrast. Acts 26, 24, and 25. Festus said with a loud voice, Paul, thou art beside thyself. You know what that means? Someone beside themselves, they're not in their right mind, are they? And then he says, thy much learning hath made thee mad. You might work the word crazy in there. Paul, you're beside yourself. Have you gone mad? And here's what Paul said. I'm not mad, most noble Festus, but speak forth the words of truth and soberness. No, I've got my wits. I've got my mind. And I know what I'm saying and what I'm doing. Titus 2 and verse 12. Denying ungodliness and worldly lust, we should live soberly. We need to protect our minds. Keep our mind. Think clearly. Soberly, righteously, and godly in this present world. So let me give you a third word. Enkratia. Now there's a C-R-A-T in the middle of that from kratos. The root of this word is a word for strength. It's talking about strength over your own passions, governing yourself. Here's how it's used in 1 Corinthians 9:25. Every man that striveth for mastery is temperate in all things. He's got control of himself. He's self-disciplined. Acts 25:25. He reasoned of righteousness, temperance, and judgment to come. And Felix trembled. Listen, some of my brethren need to tremble. When we talk about self-control and judgment to come, they need to tremble. Felix did. And 1 Corinthians 7:9, if they cannot contain. Now, I get the idea that temperance has long been associated with aversion to alcohol. And it's like when you come to alcohol, you need to be temperate. And a lot of people have looked at that and thought, well, now that means in moderation, drink in moderation. Not necessarily, not this word. In 1 Corinthians 7 and verse 9, if they cannot contain enkratia, let them marry. It's better to marry than to burn. You know what he's talking about? Fornication. He's not saying you can be moderate in fornication. In that which is unlawful, temperance means abstinence. Okay, so those are the three words that I discussed. Here they are. Nepho, sophron, enkratia. Be awake, alert, watchful, sober, self-controlled. You see, we need to consider words like that and what the Bible teaches before we take a drink. Now, people say, well, I drink, but I don't get drunk. Well, maybe they're drunk before they know it. You see, that's the first thing that alcohol does. Before the speech is slurred, before the body starts to stumble, before all that happens, it begins to affect the mind. Now, I've seen it. I've seen it happen. And I have, in my professional career, I was an engineer in my professional career, agricultural engineer, but I worked with a lot of people that were highly educated in their professions. In fact, I supervised some of them. Some of them supervised me. I supervised some. And I had a lot of professional peers. We'd go off and we'd have to get together and we would work. When we were away from home, we'd work all day. And when the evening would come, we'd often sit down and have a meal together. And a lot of those fellas I work with, when they would have that meal in the evening, would drink alcohol with their meal. And I saw what happened. They'd begin to loosen up, become less restrained, loud, a little more arrogance, more vulgar. I was so disappointed in some of the people I was working with. And they say, well, it helped you socially. No, it didn't. I'll tell you what it did to me. I would kind of grow quiet in that, and I did not enjoy their company. They would laugh, but it wasn't funny. And the world would look on them and say, well, they didn't have much. They weren't drunk. But I saw the change in their behavior, and they weren't sober either. So we can fool ourselves. Now, they weren't drinking the ancient wines. The modern wines are much more potent than those old ancient wines that may have been used to treat a little water, just a little. I heard somebody say, well, there's a case where they said it was diluted 20-1. Well, if it was vinegar, I can see that. You'd want to dilute vinegar down, wouldn't you, to drink it, just to make it drinkable. But it's a different drink, and it has a different effect. And so be sober. Well, that's just one article. There's a lot more discussed in here. And you may want to take it home and read this, particularly if you think alcohol is harmless. It is not spiritually harmless. So take a look. Now, there's some material from house to house, heart to heart, I want to tell you about too. And there'll be some posters. And Edward, you wanted this. I'm going to give you this one in just a minute, okay? Edward, I said, well, wait till after church to get it, Edward. It talks about types and antitypes. There's things in the Old Testament that shadow things in the New Testament. It's like have you ever seen a shadow come up behind you? And then there's a shadow, but you turn around and you see the substance. Well, in the Old Testament, we have shadows. In the New Testament, we have the substance. And sometimes that's called type, antitype. And this one was literally kind of creative. Have you ever thought of thinking of the burning bush that Moses saw in the wilderness and compared that to the Lord's church? Well, I've never done that, but this poster spells out ways that they can kind of compare. So Edward here, I hope you can get that later. And you got it. Okay, very good. Well, there's some other posters like that back there. Covenant. Here's one of the cards on covenant. Have you heard of covenants? Heard that associated with religion? Well, it's an agreement. God's covenant with man. Now, man doesn't sit down and strike a deal with God. That doesn't happen. God's in control, but he says, I'll tell you what, this is my covenant. And he tells you what it's going to be. But a lot of times when God makes a covenant, he provides a token with the covenant, something to remind you of the covenant. The covenant God made with Noah. I won't destroy the world with water again. You know what the token is? Well, there was the rainbow in the cloud. The covenant God made with Abraham. You'll be my people. Your seed. In your seed, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. Here's the token of the covenant, is circumcision. That's what it was. And then the covenant with Moses on Mount Sinai, the nation of Israel. I'll make a covenant with you. This is the sign of that covenant. You rest every seventh day on the Sabbath. That's a token of that covenant. David, your sons will be kings, and the Messiah will come from you. The token of the covenant is going to be the fact that your sons will be the kings in Jerusalem. And then the new covenant, or Christ, the token of that covenant. Do this in remembrance of me on the first day of the week. Take the pure, undefiled, the unleavened bread and the fruit of the vine, and remember, Jesus came in the flesh and suffered for us and died on that cross. There's a token of that covenant. So it's a little card that compares those covenants. Here's one I thought would be good for children. Boy, was I wrong. It's 5 animals you won't meet in heaven. It's got this donkey. I thought, oh, the children are like that one. But listen, everything in the Bible is not for children. Now, here are the 5 animals. See if I remember them. There was the ox, and the horse, and the mule, and the dog, and the pig. But he's not talking about the animals. He's talking about men that act like those animals. Now, when you see what he's talking about, you'll realize, oh, I see why that's not really a good one for children. You'll want to read it yourself. I'll give you a hint, though. Remember the ox that is led to the slaughter. In the book of Proverbs, that's compared to the fool that is led by the sinful woman. Well, when you start reading about that, you'll see what I'm talking about. It's not a child's track. It's an adult's track. And you don't want to act like an animal. That's why God doesn't want himself to look like an animal. Don't make an idol like an animal and say that's God, because then people start acting like animals. And God doesn't want us to act like animals. But now this one's good for children. What to do with wandering sheep. What to do with wandering sheep. We, like sheep, have gone astray. Remember the story of the 100 sheep, 99 in the fold, but one was lost, and he went out to find the lost sheep. So there's a track about that. It goes along pretty good with this one. Why not be a prodigal? A prodigal is a wasteful spender. But, you know, we're talking about the prodigal son, and you read that story that tells you something about sin. Sin, it says that the young man went into a far country. Sin will take you farther than you intended to go. It'll cost you more than you wanted to pay. It'll keep you longer than you want to stay. Well, you don't want to be a prodigal. Jesus and the woman at the well. Very familiar story. This one really is about worship, though. They that worship me must worship in spirit and in truth. And that's where this track focuses. Here, is it a matter of fellowship? Now, we have differences, don't we? And a lot of times, well, I don't think that's what that's. I think this is teaching this. No, it's teaching that, and so we have a difference. And yet sometimes because of the difference in teaching, we don't have fellowship. How do we know whether we can have fellowship or not when there is a difference? Well, there's a lot of things to consider. It's not just an open and shut case. We're all learning, and we've all got, and a lot of people come into the church with all kinds of ideas, and we've got to let people grow and overcome that. And some things we might differ on really aren't that significant, but some things are. And so this track discusses ways we might be some things to consider when we say, is this really a matter of fellowship or not? Now, here's one. It's good for a young person. The older we get, the harder this is. Can you change your personality? You know, there's certain things about your personality that you can't change, and you don't need to. You don't need to. It's neither right nor wrong, but there are some things about your personality that might have a tendency to cause you to do something wrong. You can get control of that. You never have to do what's wrong. You can always do what's right. And if you have a personality with a tendency that, like maybe you've got a short temper, and that's part of your personality. Okay, I understand that, but you can get control of that. In fact, you can learn to use that for good. So it's about how to address those things. Don't we all? You know, of all the people I've ever had trouble trying to figure out and understand, the worst one has been myself. And most of us are probably that way. How do you deal with yourself? Well, that track will give a little guidance on that. A father's homemade religion. Fathers, boy, you are so important when it comes to the religion of your family. Fathers, provoke not your children to wrath. Bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. A lot of times it's the mother that's the strong religious one. Here's one for fathers. How to face your Golgotha. You know what that is. That's when Jesus went to be crucified. He went to Gethsemane first, see. How do you face a Golgotha? Well, if the Lord be with us, tears from a Savior's eye, heaven's just 4 steps away. It's baptism for the remission of sins. These are the tracts, the new ones that are set out there. And I'm not going to take your time to go into all of them, but there'll be other tracts out there as well. Take those, consider them, and use them. But I can answer that last one. Is baptism for the remission of sins? Yes, it is. And I thought, what a good way to end that with an invitation then to be baptized for the remission of your sins. And so if you need to be baptized, well, if you haven't been, you need to be. If you want to be in Christ, and if you have been, but you haven't been faithful, then you need to return, and we'll pray for you if that's necessary. We'll help you. So if you need to respond to this invitation, you can come forward as we stand and sing.